It was October 2023, just before Halloween. I was 28 and living in a quiet rural town tucked into the foothills of the Oregon mountains. The place was small, maybe 800 residents, and the landscape was an endless stretch of thick pine forest, with fog hanging low in the mornings like it was always hiding something. There wasn't much to do except fish, hike, or disappear into the woods for a weekend of camping. That's exactly what Jake, my best friend since high school, and I planned to do. Had heard about a secluded campsite from a coworker, said it had a great lake view and complete solitude. We left early Saturday afternoon. It only took about 20 minutes to reach the trailhead, which was barely visible, a sliver in the underbrush with no signs or markers. We had to park on the shoulder of an old logging road. The trail wound through dense pine, barely wide enough for one person at a time. We hiked for an hour, pushing through branches and weaving past half-dead trees. When we finally arrived, I could tell instantly this was no scenic lakeside spot. It was a murky, algae-coated swamp. The water was still, choked with reeds and fallen branches. Maybe it used to be a lake, but now it looked forgotten, like nature was reclaiming it. We laughed it off. Jake tossed his pack down but then pointed. "There's a tent," he said. Across the pond, half hidden in the trees, was a small dark-colored tent. It sat alone, still as the water. I squinted and scanned the edge of the trees. That's when I saw them. A person was standing at the edge of the water, directly across from us, just standing there, watching. I lifted my hand in a quick wave, trying to play it cool. They didn't respond, didn't even shift. We assumed they were camping there and moved on. We set up our tents on a slope away from the water and spent the afternoon joking, making a fire pit and playing cards. But every time I glanced back at the pond, something unsettled me. We never saw the person again. Not near their tent, not walking around, just gone. As night fell, a thick fog drifted in, muting the forest sounds. We built a fire, cooked dinner, and were halfway through a dumb ghost story when Jake suddenly froze, his eyes wide. "There's someone behind you," he whispered. I turned around slowly. About 20 feet away, at the edge of the firelight, stood a figure. Long, tangled hair, dark clothing, just barely visible in the shadows, motionless. Jake stood up. "Hey, you okay?" I followed with, "Do you need anything?" The figure stayed there, breathing shallowly, then suddenly turned and disappeared into the darkness without a word. We stared at each other, trying to laugh it off, but our nerves were shot. Still, we were stubborn. "It's probably the camper across the water," Jake muttered. Weird, but harmless. We doused the fire halfway and turned in for the night, though every creak in the woods made my skin crawl. I was drifting into a light sleep when my tent zipper flew open and Jake yanked me awake. "Noah, wake up. He was right next to your tent." My heart thundered. Jake's face was pale, drenched in sweat. He said he woke up hearing rustling, opened his tent and saw that same figure, crouching by mine, inches from the wall. When the person noticed him, they bolted. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. We rebuilt the fire, packed up everything, and sat facing the woods, clutching our flashlights. The sounds of the forest were gone. No crickets, no breeze, just silence. It was the longest night of my life. When the first hint of sunlight broke through the trees, we bolted. Made it back to the car in under 30 minutes, half jogging the whole way. Later that day, we decided to report it, not expecting much. Just wanted someone to know there was a creeper in the woods. But a few hours after filing the report, we got a call. They asked us to come in. Apparently, the tent we saw across the pond belonged to a woman who'd been missing for over a month. Her car had been found miles away. They searched the area around the swamp but found nothing new. Then they showed us her photo. Jake and I both shook our heads. It wasn't the person we saw, not even close. That meant someone else had been out there, someone who had been using the abandoned tent or watching it. Maybe they had something to do with her disappearance. Maybe they were waiting for someone else to show up, maybe us. I don't like to imagine what would have happened if Jake hadn't woken up, if that thing, whoever it was, had gotten into my tent instead of running. Sometimes I still hear the crunch of footsteps in dry leaves when I'm alone. Sometimes I see that face not clear, just the outline standing beyond the tree line in my dreams. Whatever was out there that night wasn't just lost. It was hunting. It was early November 2022. The leaves had mostly fallen, and the air carried that damp, earthy smell of late autumn. I was 32 then, living alone in a small cabin on a couple acres of wooded property in rural West Virginia. My nearest neighbor was nearly half a mile away, which I loved. Solitude suited me. Behind my home was a stretch of forest that dipped into a shallow valley. About a 10-minute walk in, I had cleared a small area that I used for occasional solo camping trips. Nothing fancy, no views, no creeks, just trees, silence, and space to think. That Friday afternoon, I decided to camp out there for the night. I packed light, a tent, a lantern, some firewood, and a bag of food. Around 4:00 p.m., I grabbed my gear and headed down the trail, enjoying the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots. I set up camp quickly, securing the tent and stacking wood by the fire ring. As I was laying out my chair, I noticed movement in the trees about 100 yards away. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as I focused, I realized it was a person tall, wearing a dark hoodie, walking slowly between the trees. My stomach tightened. No one should have been there. That was my land. And based on the direction they came from, they would have had to cross a locked gate or cut through my neighbor's property. Still, I wasn't angry, just confused. They weren't approaching me. In fact, they were walking away, deeper into the woods. Maybe they were lost, I thought. Maybe a hunter who took a wrong turn. I kept watching for another minute, but they disappeared behind a ridge. I didn't feel threatened, but the peace I usually felt out here had faded. Over the next few hours, I tried to relax. I sat in my chair, read a few chapters of a book, and roasted hot dogs over the fire. By the time dusk fell, the trees around me had gone black, and a low fog had started to settle into the valley. The silence was thick. No wind, no crickets, just the occasional snap of a branch far off. Then I heard it. Footsteps fast, heavy, coming from behind me. I spun around. In the distance, through the fog, I could barely make out a figure sprinting through the woods. They didn't stop. They didn't call out. Just charged past my sight at full speed, crashing through the brush like something was chasing them or like they were chasing something. Then they were gone. The sound faded, and the forest returned to silence. I stood frozen, heart pounding. I couldn't tell if it was the same person I saw earlier, but something about the way they ran it was frantic, wild. I considered packing up, but convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe they were just a kid messing around. Besides, I was only 10 minutes from home. If something felt off, I could leave in a heartbeat. I added more wood to the fire and stayed up another couple hours, listening. But nothing else happened. Around 1000 p.m. I climbed into my tent. The fire had burned low. Break time quote 1.5 s quote slash. I zipped the tent shut and pulled my sleeping bag tight around my shoulders. The air was cold, but the silence had returned. For a while, I woke suddenly to the sound of running again. This time it was different. Closer, faster, coming straight at me. I sat up, disoriented, as the footsteps pounded through the fallen leaves. They stopped right outside my tent, maybe a foot away. I held my breath. Then I saw the shadow. A human figure stood just outside, swaying slightly. I could see their outline through the fabric, head tilted, as if they were trying to see inside. I didn't move. Suddenly, I heard a faint tearing sound so soft at first, I thought I imagined it. Then I saw it. A blade glinting in the moonlight sliced through the fabric of my tent. A hand pushed the slit open. Then two wide, unblinking eyes locked onto mine through the gap. I screamed. My instincts kicked in. I exploded out of the tent, knocking into the side wall and tumbling onto the dirt. I sprinted into the woods barefoot, branches clawing at my arms and face. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I saw the light from my cabin's back porch. When I reached the house, I slammed the door shut and locked every bolt. I was shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone as I called the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I peeked through the blinds. That's when I saw him. Standing at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the fog, was the same figure still, silent, watching. The deputies arrived minutes later, but whoever was out there had already vanished. They searched the area, including the camp, and found the tent slashed open, just like I told them. But no tracks, no footprints, no knife, no sign of who it was. For days after, I didn't sleep. I kept the lights on. I checked every window, every door. I never saw the figure again, but the knowledge that someone not only came onto my land, but followed me back and knew where I lived, That's what truly broke me. It's been months now. Nothing else has happened, but I haven't camped since, and I don't think I ever will. It happened late November 2023, just after Thanksgiving. I was 35 at the time, trying to squeeze in one last camping trip before winter locked down the northern Colorado mountains. The air was already crisp during the day and bone cold after sunset, but I was used to it. I'd been camping solo for years and liked the quiet. It helped me reset. I took Friday off work and drove about an hour north into a forested basin I'd visited a few times before. The spot wasn't on any official campground list, just a flat patch of land near a small winding creek, a mile or so off the main road. It felt tucked away from the world. When I got to the trailhead a little after 9 a.m., there were two other cars, a clean silver SUV and a beat-up black pickup caked with mud. The latter looked like it had spent weeks on logging roads, scratched paint, a cracked rear window, and no plates. Something about it instantly gave me a weird feeling. Still, I parked and started hiking. The cold hit harder in the shade, so I layered up with a beanie and thermal coat. A little ways down the trail, I passed an older man and a young boy father and son, I assumed. They gave me a polite nod, their gear suggesting they'd just spent the night out. That accounted for one of the cars. The trail opened up to the clearing around 11. It was empty, no tents, no signs of other campers. I figured whoever drove the truck must have gone deeper into the woods or left it behind for some reason. I picked a spot near the tree line, set up my tent, and gathered some dry branches for a fire later. For the next few hours, I wrote in my travel journal, cooked some lunch, and tried to ignore the creeping chill. By late afternoon, I had a decent fire going and was warming my hands when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. A man was walking slowly down the trail. He looked around 40, heavy coat, face partially obscured by a black gaiter pulled up under his nose. He carried a small, sagging backpack that looked too light for serious camping. I nodded politely. He didn't speak, just gave a faint nod and continued past me. He went to the far end of the clearing, maybe 60 feet away, and sat down at the base of a pine tree. No gear, no setup. Just sat, staring out at the creek. I kept glancing over at him. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 45. He didn't move, just sat there, face hidden, still as a statue. I debated whether to say something, but didn't want to come off confrontational. Maybe he was just resting before moving on, but everything about him was off. His lack of equipment, that sagging backpack, how he hadn't even taken off his gloves. And then, just as the sun dipped below the ridge, he stood up and started walking toward me. I stiffened. He stopped on the opposite side of my fire, just close enough that I could see his eyes over the flame. He smiled, but his eyes didn't smile. They were glassy, empty. "Mind if I share your fire?" he asked, voice muffled through the cloth. Didn't expect it to be this cold. I forced a nod. "Sure. Yeah, no problem." He sat down, still staring at me with that smile. His body was still, too still, like it wasn't used to being still, like he was forcing himself to seem normal. "Do you have a tent?" I asked. He shook his head. Didn't think I'd need one. No follow-up, no laugh, just silence. 10 minutes passed with nothing but the crackling fire between us. I barely breathed. I could feel his eyes on me the whole time, watching, measuring. I stood up and pretended to grab something from my tent, using the moment to unzip and roll up my sleeping bag. My fingers trembled. When I turned around, he was still watching. Same expression, same dead-eyed stare. Then he stood, never breaking eye contact, and began walking back toward the trees. But he didn't sit down again. He kept walking, slowly, quietly, into the woods, and vanished. I stood frozen for at least a full minute, straining my ears. Nothing. No twigs breaking, no leaves rustling, just stillness. Then it hit me. If he was planning to come back, I couldn't be here when he did. I moved fast, stuffing everything into my pack, not even bothering to fold my tent. I left the fire going, hoping it would trick him into thinking I was still there. As I shouldered my gear and turned to leave, a chill swept up my spine like ice water. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. The hike back was a nightmare. The cold sank deeper into my clothes, my flashlight barely illuminating the narrow trail. Every time a branch snapped, I spun around. Every gust of wind through the trees made me flinch. For nearly 2 hours I walked, never once daring to stop. When I got back to the trailhead, the black truck was gone. That detail burned itself into my brain. He had no tent, no sleeping bag, barely a backpack, and yet the vehicle was his. That meant he'd been out there all day, sitting, waiting. I still don't know what he wanted. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But I'm certain of one thing: he wasn't there to camp. And if I'd stayed that night, I don't think I'd have woken up to tell this story.